call on the Leader of the Opposition, Keir Starmer.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. In an effort to hide from his failures, the Prime Minister spent this week arguing about an ancient relic that only a tiny minority of the British public have any interest in. Mr Speaker, that's enough about the Tory party. In 2019, they all promised the country that they would control immigration, numbers will come down, the British people will be in control. How's it going?
Prime Minister.
Mr Speaker, let me be crystal clear.
Starmer.
Mr Speaker, never mind the British Museum, it's the Prime Minister who's obviously lost his marbles. Mr Speaker, the Greek Prime Minister came to London to meet him, a fellow NATO member, an economic ally, one of our most important partners in tackling illegal immigration. But instead of using that meeting to discuss those serious issues, he tried to humiliate him and cancelled at the last minute. Why such small politics, Prime Minister?
Prime Minister.
Mr Speaker, of course, we're always happy to discuss important topics of substance.
Mr Speaker, I discussed with the Greek Prime Minister the economy, security, immigration. I also told him we wouldn't change the law regarding the marbles. It's not that difficult, Prime Minister. The reality is simple. He has no plan on boat crossings, and migration is at a record high. His policy is that companies can pay workers from abroad 20% less than British workers. That has contributed to those record-high immigration levels, hasn't it?
Prime Minister.
Mr Speaker, he talks about the boat crossings. He's failed to notice.
So let me get this straight. The Prime Minister is now saying that meeting the Prime Minister of Greece is somehow supporting the EU instead of discussing serious issues. He's just got dug further into that hole that he's made for himself. And ever, rather than deal with the facts, he's prosecuting his one-man war on reality. And that reality is stuck. Under this government, a bricklayer from overseas can be paid £2,500 less than somebody who's already here. A plasterer, £3,000 less. An engineer, £6,000 less. The list goes on. It's absurd. Labour would scrap his perverse wage-cutting policy. Why won't he?
Mr Speaker, as I said, we have taken significant measures and will bring forward more. And indeed...
Mr Speaker, there's only one party that's lost control of the borders, and they're sitting right there. And this is a government not just in turmoil, in open revolt. The Immigration Minister thinks the Prime Minister is failing because apparently nobody will listen to his secret plan. The former Home Secretary thinks he's failing because of his magical thinking. The current Home Secretary thinks he's failing. He even took time out of his busy schedule insulting people in the North East to admit he agrees with Labour. The Prime Minister seems to be the only person on the Tory benches without his own personal immigration plan. Clearly, his own side don't have any faith in him. Why should the public?
Mr Speaker, it's really a bit rich to...
On their watch, migration has just trebled and is giving the House a lecture about targets. He's lost in La La Land. There can be few experiences more haunting for the members opposite than hearing this Prime Minister claim that he's going to sort out a problem. First, he said he'd get the NHS waiting list down. They went up. Unabashed by that, he said he'd get control of immigration. It's gone up. Following that experience, he turned his hand to bringing taxes down. And, would you believe it, the tax burden is now going to be higher than ever. It is ironic that he's suddenly taken such a keen interest in Greek culture, when he's clearly become the man with the reverse Midas touch. Everything he touches turns to... maybe the Home Secretary could help me out here. Rubbish. So will the Prime Minister do the country a favour? We'll have to check the tape again, Mr Speaker, I think. So will the Prime Minister do the country a favour, warn us what he's planning next, so we can prepare ourselves for the disaster that will inevitably follow?
Mr Speaker, at the beginning of the year we said, Mr Speaker...
P Leader Stephen Flynn.
Mr Speaker, in good news for kids this morning, it was snowing in Aberdeen, and when they looked out of the kitchen window they would have been filled with delight. But for their parents, many of them who looked out the kitchen window this morning would have been filled with dread. Dread knowing that they simply can't afford to pay their energy bills. So in that context, can I ask the Prime Minister, does he regret offering no financial mechanism whatsoever towards families this winter?
Minister.
Mr Speaker, that's simply not right to say that there isn't support for families.
Stephen Flynn.
Mr Speaker, I appreciate it's difficult for the Prime Minister to empathise when he quite clearly can't understand. But to be clear to both him and indeed the whole House, this isn't a matter of energy production. Scotland produces 6 times more gas than we consume, and around 2/3 of our electricity already comes from renewable resources. This is a consequence of decades of failed energy policy here in Westminster. Now, those of us on these benches, we believe that Scotland's energy wealth and our energy resource should benefit the people of Scotland. Why doesn't he?
Mr Speaker, the entire energy grid infrastructure in this country is...